afternoon. My name is Alan Richardson, and I am a professional activist, currently making my living by growing vegetables north of Taos in Cuesta. And I wanted to give particular thanks to all the organizers of the event, but particularly Percy Schmeiser. He's like the Elvis of seed sovereignty, and I got my picture taken with him so I can die happy. And he, if he has anything to add to our remarks, we would welcome that. But certainly he left nothing to the imagination. I thought I would give a brief PowerPoint here. I'm going to try and gallop through this as fast as possible. This is about genetic engineering and seed sovereignty. And then we can hear what Wade Collins has to say. And I'm hoping that as part of this panel we can address part of what we intend to do politically about the situation that we're facing here in New Mexico. But first, I don't know if we needed any more reasons to know that we don't want anything to do with genetic engineering and agriculture. But here are some more reasons. This is a PowerPoint designed for the Food and Seed Sovereignty Alliance. A couple of choice quotes here. The last two are particularly poignant. Not sure if everyone can read this. The second one down. What you are seeing is not just a consolidation of seed companies, it is really a consolidation of the entire food chain. That's co-president of Monsanto's ag sector. With the bottom two quotes, Monsanto should not have to vouchsafe the safety of biotech food. Our interest is in selling as much of it as possible. Assuring its safety is the FDA's job. That's the head of Monsanto. And then here we have the FDA saying, ultimately, it is the food producer who is responsible for assuring safety. So there you have it. It's a representation of DNA and how one gets to it by going down the various levels there into DNA. This representation, courtesy of New Mexico State University, is a depiction of the transcription and replication process. I think Percy touched on this before. The standard theory of genetics is that information only flows from one way, from DNA to protein, and this is sort of the conceptual underpinning of genetic engineering. The sort of one gene, one protein, information only flows one way. Here's another way of looking at it. Here at the bottom you see the central dogma again, DNA, information flowing only in one direction. Up at the top, this is a conceptual model called the fluid genome, which seems to indicate that everything is interrelated, and this is, of course, this is relevant to the issue of genetic engineering because it would indicate that a small change in one minor area can have major impacts reverberating throughout the system. And the concern is that genetic engineers do not understand the relationship between genes and the environment, and that they have very much gotten ahead of themselves. This is a depiction of an engineered gene. This is actually, it's what they call a cassette. It's actually a construct. So they take the segment of DNA or the gene that's in the middle there. You have the Terminator at the end is basically a piece of DNA that tells it to stop reading, and then the promoter is a piece of genetic material that tells the DNA to reproduce many copies of itself. This is talking about the process of genetic engineering. They extract it, the DNA in question, it's cloned, then they design the gene. The gene is modified to express the desired trait in the plant using a piece of the cauliflower mosaic virus promoter. It's basically a piece of genetic material which tells the transgene to reproduce many copies of itself. Then it is transformed and inserted. The gene is usually delivered into the chromosome of the plant cell, being engineered using a gene gun or agrobacterium. So they basically have to get past the natural species barriers. Mother Nature put those barriers up for a reason, and the genetic engineers, in their wisdom, have figured out ways to get through them. Gene gun is exactly that. They put the genetic material on a piece of gold and they blast it into the cell, or they an agrobacterium is a bacterium that specializes in crossing species boundaries, and then once they get the engineered gene, then they grow it out and cross it with various other elite high-yielding varieties. This is a depiction of that process. The transgene is in the lower right-hand corner. So that depicts how it gets into the cell itself. The human health hazards, there's a long list of them. This is courtesy of the Center for Food Safety. Among the health risks of genetic engineering are toxicity, allergenicity, antibiotic resistance, immunosuppression, cancer, and loss of nutrition. We're just going to touch on a couple of those. This is about RBGH, Monsanto's famous recombinant bovine growth hormone. Monsanto will admit that levels of a hormone called insulin-like growth factor increase by about 5 times in dairy products produced from cows with RBGH, and that is an important factor in the growth of breast cancer, prostate cancer, and colon cancer. Loss of nutrition. Here's a study from the Center of Ethics and Toxics found a 12 to 14% decline in phytoestrogens in GE soy. That's an important plant nutrient. Again, there's just, tons and tons of evidence along these lines. It's a picture from the Terra Madre event in Italy in 2006. I believe this research came out of the Ukraine, if I'm not mistaken. Pretty much speaks for itself. The small unhealthy mouse was fed GM soy. The healthy one was fed conventional soy. Here's a picture of stomach mucosa of rats fed with raw GM soy. And yeah, proof is in the pudding there. These examples can be individually tracked down. This is from the Institute of Science and Society based in the United Kingdom. These are, examples of animals that became, and human beings became sick or died, where the common factor was genetically modified organisms. Environmental concerns include biological pollution, genetic contamination, superweeds, resistance to Bt, harm to non-target organisms, Terminator technology, which has been talked about, pharma crops, which are genetically engineered crops that are engineered to produce pharmaceutical and or industrial compounds. These are the kinds of genetically engineered crops that even the genetic engineers can admit you don't want mixing in your food supply, and there are numerous examples of where they've gotten into the food supply. So that means that genetic engineers, the companies, the universities, and the federal regulators cannot even contain the stuff that they will admit is bad for you. This depicts the web of existing laws. A lot of folks think that genetically modified foods was such a radical change that it should have produced a new cabinet in the United States government. Instead, the Reagan and Bush administrations sort of cobbled together this regulatory framework. It's very piecemeal, so genetically engineered organisms are regulated through a tangled web that involves the FDA, EPA, and the USDA through the various acts that you see listed there. The federal government, their policy on genetically modified foods is that they are generally recognized as safe, and this was one of the greatest coups ever won by the corporations who are behind genetic engineering. A lot of people think that the FDA vouchsafes for the safety of genetically modified foods. That's not the case. They do no independent safety testing. They and this was based on I think on a nutritional analysis. What this basically does is rules out the entire engineering process. So they're only testing the end product, and they're saying, it's more or less the same, close enough, or substantially equivalent. But this basically, the corporations who were behind this, basically gave themselves a pass by getting genetically modified crops given this designation as generally recognized as safe. Specific flaws in the biotech company testing practices: the use of surrogate GM proteins for testing rather than the plant-produced proteins. That means that they will put the transgene into a bacteria because it's easier, and then they'll use that for their laboratory tests. The trouble there being is that bacteria and plants process certain things differently, like sugars, for example. So they're going to miss an entire category of allergic effects by doing that. The companies have failed to test for most possible unintended effects of the unpredictable genetic engineering process, in particular a lack of long-term animal feeding studies. And then there's the unfortunate tendency of companies to manipulate test conditions to get the desired results, which is facilitated by the failure of regulatory agencies to establish test protocols. Here we have some specific shortcomings of the various federal agencies. FDA does not require testing of GM foods, but has a voluntary consultation process. So if you feel like giving them some data, that'd be great, but it's generally pre-digested. The FDA, they review the summary data, so they don't even review the original data. And once in a blue moon, they'll ask for some more data, and the biotech companies can just be like, no, and the FDA goes, oh, okay. The EPA, amongst other things, they raised the maximum permissible levels of herbicide residues on crops to facilitate the introduction of herbicide-tolerant crops. And the USDA's history of oversight of experimental test plots is pretty bad. Genetic contamination, we've been talking about this all day. Only 1% of Iowa cornfields were sown with Starlink, which is a variety of corn that was unapproved for human consumption. Harvest from half the state's fields showed at least a trace of Starlink. That was one of the first big major contamination cases that broke. This is another big one down here in 2004. Roundup-ready creeping bentgrass contaminated wild bentgrass 13 miles from the field trial site. So there you have a creeping Kentucky bluegrass that is now resistant to Roundup that has escaped into the wild, which in the case of like state parklands or something like that, you now have to use something harsher than Roundup. It was designed for use on golf courses, so they could just saturate the whole thing with Roundup. Contamination of native varieties. Again, we've spoken of this extensively. The contamination of native corn in Mexico and Guatemala. The industry's position on contamination. This is highly relevant to what we're talking about here today. It is odd that some activists find the natural process of pollen flow to be alarming when it comes from precisely improved biotech crops that require fewer pesticide sprays, et cetera, et cetera. If pollen from biotech crops has carried DNA from biotech improved varieties into Mexican land races, it is because the land race stewards have continued their age-old practice of importing foreign genetic material as a source of new variation to use in improving the ever-dynamic and evolving man-made corns. You see, they're making an end run around the entire argument. They're like, what's the problem with pollen flow? Isn't that, the wonders of nature? And, they go on to say, basically, if you get contaminated, your crops are getting improved for free. So lucky you. And that's basically the position here in New Mexico. As Percy was talking about before, Monsanto's technology use guide recognizes that genetically engineered crops are by nature transportable from a user's farm. So they'll even admit it. Since corn is a naturally cross-pollinated crop, a minimal amount of pollen movement, some of which can carry genetically improved traits, between neighboring fields is a well-known and normal occurrence in cedar grain production. And then down at the bottom you see some of the best data that's available about cross-pollination. Cross-pollination between two fields of maize at 200 meters occurs at levels greater than 0.1%. Here, this chronicles basically all the recorded contamination cases between 1997 and 2006. This is, of course, a fraction of what's actually out there because so few of them are actually going to come to light. You know, it's not just about things that have been commercialized, maybe winding up where they're not wanted, but the fact that there are all these experimental field trials out there which are poorly managed. So you have things that are never going to make it to the marketplace that are nonetheless escaping into the wild, escaping into the food supply and cross-pollinating with wild relatives. Maize at the top, far away the most at 35%. But this also makes it pretty clear everything that's ever been engineered has resulted in at least one contamination incident that's been discovered. This is a map of where those incidents occurred. This is particularly interesting because this case of was a case of gene escape in the white rice harvest. I should mention that my background as an activist is I worked with White Earth Land Recovery Project on the bill in Minnesota to prevent the genetic engineering of wild rice. And for the first 2 years before I was working with them, they were basically the Ojibwa in Minnesota were basically laughed at in the legislature of Minnesota. The issue there being, you know, the Ojibwa were clearly saying, we don't want this forced on us, and if you grow this genetically engineered wild rice in the out of doors, it's going to contaminate our wild rice. And the University of Minnesota, you know, really sort of sneered at this. They're like, oh, you know, you silly Indians, you don't know what you're talking about. And you know, in that case, you have you know, cultivated wild rice, you know, wild rice that has been turned into an agricultural industrial product. Those are the farmers who think that engineering, you know, wild rice is a good idea. The Ojibwa, you know, they took great exception to that. That was, you know, definitely a bridge too far. And one of the things that helped that campaign out tremendously was a real sea change was this incident of gene escape in the white rice crop. It's so amazing that it basically caused the entire scientific community to finally acknowledge that there can be no containment. This was from a university-based experiment on less than half an acre. It had 3 times as much of a buffer zone as the USDA requires. And it got all over the world before anybody even noticed it. And so the Ojibwa were able to, you know, point this out in their campaign in committee. Well, guys, what about this thing right here? This caused like a $1 billion financial catastrophe for white rice farmers. The white rice market never wanted genetic engineering ever. Neither the farmers nor the markets. So from a strictly, you know, a capitalist point of view, it just makes no sense. But these white rice farmers were left holding the bag. This is an ongoing class action lawsuit where rice farmers and millers are trying to recover their lost money. It's up to $1 billion now. The company that's responsible, Bayer Crop Science, they claim it was an act of God, and yet the same thing also caused, you know, the scientific community to say, okay, we now admit that the technology is uncontainable. So that's enough to make your head explode if you think about it. Yeah. Also, I should say that I recently went down to Chile Field Day in Las Cruces and asked them about this funding package, which includes money to accelerate the genetic engineering of Chile. So I raised the issue to the genetic engineers down there. And I got into a conversation with a guy who was actually a mechanical engineer in the cotton gin, who was taking this sort of pro-GMO side. But he sort of balked at this idea that a genetically engineered chili from the southern part of the state might wind up here up north. He's like, oh, but there's a desert in the way. You know, and it just sort of surprised me that, you know, I'm like, dude, these things cross oceans before, you know, people find them. So it's just, you'd think that people who supported GMOs would be up to speed on this kind of thing. Okay, here's a little bit about Monsanto and their seed piracy matters. This, again, is some of the latest data about exactly how much money we're talking about. Farmers have paid Monsanto an estimated to somewhere between $85 million and $160 million as far as the publicly available information goes. Curiously, the number of seed piracy matters reported by Monsanto is 20 to 40 times the number of lawsuits that we have in the public court records, meaning they've gotten more money than was awarded to them somehow. That's right. So it makes you scratch your head. Here's a breakdown by the states. This does not include California. California just passed their first sort of anti-GMO bill. It offers some marginal protection from Monsanto coming on your land and testing your corn and this sort of thing. So a little bit of protection, but of course all those people are already contaminated. They probably wish they weren't contaminated in the first place. But again, as you can see, as Percy made clear, this kind of thing really is happening. Wherever genetically engineered crops are widely grown, these lawsuits surely follow. It's happening all throughout the Corn Belt. The threat is very real. One of the many issues with Monsanto is this revolving door. The Center for Food Safety has documented at least 22 people who've worked either directly or indirectly for Monsanto who have also worked for the U.S. government in some form. And as you can see there, this guy, Michael R. Taylor, he's jumped back and forth, that many times. So let's not kid ourselves. These biotech companies wrote their own regulations, and that's why they don't work very well if you're a member of the public. They work great if you're a biotech company. This again, Percy was talking about this before. This is the checklist. This is what you would be bound by if you chose to grow engineered crops, or if you got caught up in the dragnet of one of these contracts. I heard that there's an employee at the Sustainable Ag Center in Alcalde who's been giving away free samples of genetically engineered corn for the last 2 or 3 years. Now, I'm not sure if I think that that's true, but if it's true, it sort of begs the question, one, do the people that he's giving it to, do they know it's genetically engineered? And two, if 5 or 10 years from now, the company comes along and finds their engineered corn grown on your land in northern New Mexico, and they're like, where's the paperwork? And you're like, I got it at a free giveaway. I'm not sure that that's going to be good enough to keep you from getting sued. Maybe we should look into that. This is a breakdown of who is growing how much. The USA is still the big dog, growing 59% of all engineered crops. Argentina coming in a close second at 20%. They've apparently planted every hectare of arable land with genetically engineered soy. They're doing the backstroke in Roundup, and apparently it turns out Roundup might not be good for you if it's everywhere, and you can't eat raw soybeans. There's another important point. Again, Percy touched on this. Genetic engineers talk about, oh, we're going to increase nutrition, we're going to increase yield, we're going to do all these wonderful things. But 4 out of 5 of every acres of GM crops have been modified for herbicide tolerance. The other fifth being insect resistance, where they express their own BT. So in practice, genetic engineering is essentially herbicide tolerance technology. That's what we're talking about. There's been no trait engineered or commercialized that's been of any benefit to any consumers anywhere. And this is an important one, because one of the biotech industry's biggest rhetorical points is that genetic engineering is supposed to lead to a reduction in pesticide. Well, these are the best facts that are available. Dr. Charles Benbrook is a scientific titan, and he really crunched the data better than it's ever been crunched. So, and this is what he got. Now, while the insect-resistant crops that express their own pesticide, assuming you don't want to consider that a pesticide, reduced the amount of pesticide by 16 million pounds. However, the use of herbicide-tolerant crops increased it by 138 million pounds for a net gain of 122 million pounds. This, you can see, is the increase in and how often biotech companies are claiming that the actual contents of their genetically engineered crops that the public has no right to know what it is. A CBI, it's confidential business information. Not only do you not have a right to know where these test plots are being grown, but as you can see, increasingly they simply refuse to disclose exactly what is going on. This is from the Indigenous Peoples Council on Biotechnology that Deborah Harry works for and was talking about. This again is just transposes the different value systems of traditional agriculture and genetic engineering. On the traditional agriculture side, we have community farming and self-sufficiency, which strengthens community cultural and spiritual identity. And on the genetic engineering side, we have that it encourages the integration into global economy and into the culture of industrial production. I think we get it. Okay. Seed sovereignty is, it's about protecting, culturally significant crops. This was a poster that was circulated to raise the profile of the issue in Minnesota. They refer to the campaign as, to keep it wild, the Save Wild Rice campaign and/or the Keep It Wild campaign. As you see up in the right-hand corner, once genetically engineered wild rice is introduced, it cannot be taken back. So what kind of progress has been made? Because there are three sort of major fronts or crops where these kinds of issues and campaigns have come to the fore. Well, in Minnesota, binding legislation to protect wild rice from contamination by engineered genes was signed by the governor on May 8th of 2007. Of course, that bill is only as good as long as it actually prevents the introduction of genetically engineered wild rice. I'd be happy to talk about what that bill does in detail, but it is the first legally binding seed sovereignty bill anywhere in the country, and it's a political deal that everyone could live with. At the same time as that was happening, a 10-year moratorium on the genetic engineering of taro passed the Hawaiian State Senate. And you may recognize these gentlemen. The Seed Sovereignty Declaration was incorporated into the Seed Sovereignty Memorial, which passed the legislature in 2007, I believe it was. And now the bad news. What happened last year, the following legislative session? Well, a funding package was passed, which includes funding to accelerate the genetic engineering of New Mexico chili. And this year, this is about seed and plant preemption. All of these states have had their ability to regulate GMOs removed, generally in shady midnight deals where the legislature has allowed the biotech industry to basically remove from local governments and the states the ability to regulate seeds at all. So it's exactly what it says. These states will never have a GMO-free zone unless they're able to roll these things back. As you can see, we are sandwiched between two such states. The Native Hawaiians, after winning this 10-year moratorium on the engineering of taro, which is vastly stronger than anything else that was even being fought for in Minnesota or New Mexico, when they finally got a hearing in their House of Representatives this last legislative session, the industry, in their arrogance, attached an amendment to this bill to protect taro. They attached an amendment which would have stripped Hawaii of its ability to regulate GMOs forever. This, I think, means that one thing that hopefully we can all agree upon is that we need to get a commitment from legislators in New Mexico that seed preemption will be forever taken off the table. This, I think, would be a nice opening move given where we are. I think it's something that we can all agree upon. It might not even require a piece of legislation, but simply we want to see it in writing, because this would be a game-ending move. And if they will do that in Hawaii, I'm not sure what would keep them from doing it here. It didn't pass, by the way, but of course it made the Native Hawaiians destroy their own bill. You know, they voted it down. These are some of the words to watch for. These are some of the terms and phrases that have been snuck into state legislation that do that. That, you know, you just sort of wake up one morning and you find that your ability to regulate GMOs has been removed. So as we move forward, you know, we all need to keep our eyes on the ball. We need to monitor this, you know, agriculture bills for this kind of wording from now until forever. Sure. The main headings are express preemption. It provides for certain jurisdiction of seeds. It's sort of a long-winded way of saying we're going to remove from you local governments your ability to control seeds. Sole authority. Sole authority is the Board of Agriculture shall have the sole authority for the banning of plants. Again, it's like, you know, the board, you know, the State Board of Agriculture is like, sorry, local governments, you know, and enjoin uniform statewide regulation, statewide concern. It's all legalese, but we need commitments from our legislators to never go there. Well, that's essentially it. This is an abbreviated version of a longer presentation. This is one of 4 or 5 frames. This is from the book Genetic Roulette, which has been newly released by Jeffrey Smith. Of course, genetic engineers will tell you, or the FDA will tell you that genetic engineering is so safe they went ahead and made it mandatory to grow and consume. But this book has 65 different headings. So this chronicles basically every health effect to date. And the title again is Genetic Roulette, the documented health risks of genetically engineered food. And the table of contents can be found online. I do think it'll be widely available in natural food stores, including La Montanita here before too long. Here's another fantastic one. Christmas right around the corner. This is Your Right to Know. This is put out by the Center for Food Safety. It is also very, very thorough. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Wade Collins here, but I would hope that before the end of this panel that we can discuss and talk about the political part of this. How are we all going to work together? What do we hope to achieve? I really think we need to come away with this, away from this event with some coherent sense of how we're going to proceed. Our different groups working together, or are they having, you know, similar but mutually respectful agendas? How is that going to work? That's a big unanswered question. I will say that, you know, that's potentially a very long conversation. We need to do this right. But I'll say that one of the most important things is that we all be in touch with each other. That we need to be networked. It doesn't really matter whose database it is, which nonprofit that it is, but that is the most important thing about being able to make a political difference, is that people be able to contact each other quickly. And I will say that, you know, I've been volunteering for a small nonprofit in Taos called Sustain Taos, and you know, we are basically prepared to state that we are openly opposed to the genetic engineering of chili, and that this, you know, that this is something we, you know, that's something that needs to be discussed openly. And I hope we can get into that a little more in a few minutes.